This is Remote Ruby.
Have you any remote idea to the meaning of the word?
What's good?
I almost said nothing, but that's
I gotta stop asking you this question. Every time I ask, you and Chris are like,
I'm just not used to the question.
You're not used to thinking about good things?
No, I'm not used to people asking me how I am.
That's fair.
Good. Things are good. We've been rolling some things out at Podia. The things have been going great. I'm actually doing that as we speak because Jason couldn't hold on 2 seconds, but it's cool because
2 seconds.
No, it's going to take way more than 2 seconds. Yeah. No, I'm lying. Yeah, things are good. Having a good week this week. Good.
Yeah.
How about you?
Good. I'm happy to see the checkout stuff rolling out, which is what Andrew's talking about. We talked about this briefly a while ago, the Stripe stuff, but a checkout update is really exciting for us. I started on the project. Sebastian, who has joined us before, joined me on the project. Then Andrew joined Podia, and they moved me out of the project because Andrew is just so good at writing checkout code. So.
Oh my God, that's a funny joke.
It's exciting though. I'm good. I tweeted about this. I started the process of removing Webpacker.
Yeah.
And I started by unifying some views, deleting some of our unused templates. Today, I haven't merged it yet because I'm scared to merge it. Today, I went through and updated all of our inline SVG pack tags to be inline SVG tags. So what I'm doing is moving all our Webpack served icons and graphics back into the asset pipeline, and also removed any image pack tags. We don't have a ton. We had a couple of them. And so Monday, when I merged this, the only thing left in Webpacker would be style sheets and JavaScript, and then style sheets will be the thing I tackle next. So
you don't want to just ship it and then log off for the weekend?
I thought about it. Andrea was like, going to merge it.
I bet. I'm sure how that conversation went down.
Well, I want to so bad, but the change I made this morning was like 900 files changed that I shipped.
Right.
I also took Slack off my phone. And so that makes me nervous that like dev errors will be on fire and I'll just be.
Don't worry, I'll text you.
Playing Mario Party.
Hey, whoa, hold on. What? Mario Party?
Yeah, dude. My kids are hella into Mario games right now.
I love Mario Party. I am a Mario Kart god. That's all I have to say. I've been playing Mario Kart since I've played Mario Kart on every single platform that exists. I am very good at Mario Kart.
You are so humble about such things like Rocket League and Mario Kart.
Yeah. And Battlefield. I am very good at Battlefield. Starting to get good at Grand Theft Auto again.
Congrats, dude.
Thanks, man. Thank you.
Yeah, I've been playing on the Switch. My kids have been destroying Joy-Cons like they're pieces of paper. So I went to buy some used one the other day. They're still like $35 used.
Wow. So, yeah, I've heard they're breakable.
Like each Joy-Con is $35, not like a So I bought a Pro controller while I was there and it said, kids, this is not yours.
This one's mine. Yeah. Did you know, I'm sorry, this is going to take 2 seconds. There was a hack incident at Xbox because this 5-year-old kid, like his dad put parental controls on Xbox so that he couldn't play his dad's games. And the kid somehow figured out if you mash spaces into the password and hit enter, it would just let you in.
Cool.
And so Microsoft credited him as like a security research specialist for finding that. I thought it was kind of fun.
Amazing. This will be my last thing. You have a Switch. What other consoles do you have?
I don't have a Switch.
Oh, you just are really good at Mario Kart, like in your head?
No. On God.
Okay.
Bet.
Well, what do you have?
I am currently just PlayStation.
4 or 5?
4.
Oh, Andrew.
Yeah. Well, PlayStation 5s were hard to find. And then I was like, why do I need a PlayStation 5? If they're going to be this expensive and hard to find. And I'd have to like meet someone in an alley to get one. That's how my friend got one. He had to meet someone in an alley. And I'm like, I think I'm done with that part of my life. So
done. I'm proud of you. I said that was my last thing, but you have triggered me. When they first came out, followed this Twitter account that was PS5 drops. So like literally one day, I don't remember if it was an incident or we were like deploying code, but I was like screen sharing with the CTO. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry, there's a PS5 drop. And start refreshing GameStop's website and got one.
Nice.
It's my proudest moment. and
Nice.
having kids and stuff. But anyway,
Oh, yeah.
final housekeeping note. Chris is still on vacation, on his mini vacation. That's
I have one final thing. I am starting a new podcast called
Oh, yeah.
Rail. Yeah, with Julie, who we both met at RailsConf. And that will probably be out at the end of July, beginning of August. So keep your eyes or ears peeled for that.
That's
My
cool.
command's done. Run.
Syntax.
Done. Disconnected. 1 failures in a row. Cool.
Perfect. Well, yeah,
All right.
it's exciting. When it is starting to drop, we'll start linking to it here.
Yes, sir.
More Ruby podcasts. That's what we talked about at RailsConf was we want more people to have podcasts. Even though like you're trying to apparently take a hold on the market by being on all of them.
Yeah.
I'm still glad there's more. Well, now that we've wasted everyone's time, let's get to the more interesting part of today. Today we are joined by Adam Cuppy. I will let Adam give a brief introduction right now. So thanks for joining us, Adam.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Well, I'm the second ranked Mario Kart god on the planet. Yeah, I do everything on a Switch and actually a PS6, in case you're wondering.
It's impressive.
So yeah, today I'm really excited to take Andrew head on this one.
Oh, I'd love to go head on.
Yeah, let's just get going now. What do you say?
Let's do it. Just
Oh, finally,
I can
finally
do
we
it.
can match Andrew.
Yeah.
I could be at a GameStop in 10 minutes, man.
Bet.
Yeah, the only thing you have a head ups on me and Jason is hairline. Other than
Hey,
that, winning.
hey, I'll take that.
Anyway, I'm fine. So I'm the co-founder of Zeal, which is an agency that's here in the United States, but I've also spent a lot of time as an actor and as a triathlete, but really active in the Ruby community as a whole. I think that just being an ambassador for folks that are coming through the industry is super, super important. And in fact, that's kind of how I met Jason. I think it was one of your first conferences you attended, I think.
Yeah, it was RubyConf 2016. It was my first RubyConf.
Yeah, and you were a shy guy in the corner, but dude, a sweetheart, man. Like, it was great meeting you, man. Yeah, so ever since, I put a lot of focus into really just being an enthusiastic ambassador to folks coming into the industry. I think it's just incredibly important. So that's why I'm here.
I find you not only like a warm personality, but also a fantastic, like engaging speaker. I think the talk at RubyConf 2015 is when it was What If Shakespeare Wrote Ruby? And it was just a different style of talk and it was fun. And I feel like every talk I've seen of yours since then is like that. So I am grateful to know you and also grateful for you joining us today.
Well, I'm a little blown away that talk got accepted. It was kind of a Hail Mary of sorts. A lot of conference talks, especially at conferences, tend to be very language specific. And I always had this idea because I spent a lot of time studying Shakespeare and classical text. I was like, you know what? There's something in this. I don't know what it is. So I just wrote up this abstract. And to be blunt, I just threw together the details. I made stuff up. But I was like, just toss it out there and see what happens. And apparently I heard a rumor that it almost made it to the keynote, but I heard. But anyway, it was one of the most fun talks I have ever given. I've given it in Australia. I've given it here in the States, but I will tell you the most fun was I gave it in Taiwan and the organizers helped translate it into Chinese, into Mandarin.
That's cool.
And so I was one of the only people that had absolutely no idea what specifically was being said, but to just hear the joy and people listening to it and going through it, because I bring 4 people up on stage and they actually perform a scene from Romeo and Juliet. And then we kind of talk how that relates to other stuff. And it was one of the most enjoyable experiences I've ever had in my career, ever. And so it's just given me the motivation to keep doing things like it for sure. And I'm glad you were there. I'm really glad you were there.
I love it. You also spoke at the first Southeast Ruby. You just gave a talk, Pluck It. That was in Nashville. That was the first Southeast Ruby. I had no idea what I was doing. So also thanks for taking a chance and coming to speak there.
It's fun.
Today, we kind of want to talk about really how to train and keep Ruby alive, things like that. Just lighthearted topics. But before we dig into that, maybe if you could give us a background on how you got into programming. You mentioned like you've done acting, stuff like that. Maybe it's just kind of your journey to today.
Yeah, certainly. So I went to college and have a degree in theater performance. I took one single technical class and it wasn't awesome. It was all HTML. And looking back, there was this one guy who his capstone project was this ridiculous Flash website. I mean, ridiculous. And all of us, we had just been learning HTML. Like most of us were doing like basic tables. And this guy had an appallingly amazing Flash website. We were all blown away. Come to find out, the dude bought a template online and sold it off as his project. But anyway, to each their own. But that was it. I always had some level of aptitude with computers. I can never stake the claim that I've been programming since I was 3. But when I was in college, I played a lot with audio engineering because of theater and a lot of video engineering. My very first company was a very small video production company that almost exclusively did wedding videos. But at the same time, I was getting myself into the theater profession, and it is a hard profession, really, really hard. And it could literally come down to looks, as you'd imagine. And so that struck me really wrong because I loved the theater art form so much. I loved performance. I loved what it could do to an audience. I just loved so much about it. But it sucked. It sucked to just know that at the end of the day, it could just come down to the fact that I was a tall redhead, and that would be it. So I went and did a season at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, which is one of the top regional theaters in the world, very well known. And I was talking to this actor who was, I think, in his early 40s, and he had made a career out of it. And I remember asking him, what's it like in this profession? Like, what's it like? And he goes, well, every 3 months you look for a new job. And that was all it took. I was like, nope, done. I mean, I love the art form, but this is not the profession for me. So I knew that if I wanted to keep doing theater the way I wanted to do it, I was going to have another career path. And the closest thing to what I was familiar with was marketing. So I started doing some basic graphic design. I think I was charging like $20 an hour, $30 an hour. I made a couple $100 here and there. But there was a big, now publicly traded coffee company in our area called Dutch Bros Coffee. And my now business partner, and at the time, early friend, he was the marketing director and said, hey, I could use a marketing assistant to do some graphic design. So he hired me, and that kind of started my trajectory down a more computer-oriented path, we'll call it. About a year and a half later, we decided to spin off a small side business where we would do this for other businesses. And in the process, we started to get more and more requests to do website design, which evolved into web applications because, as many of us know, a lot of people don't actually know the difference between the two. Really, it's one day you add a form, and then the next day somebody has a login, and now you have a web app, basically. And so we realized one day that we were making, it was like 80% of our revenue was based on web application development in PHP. And then we watched the 15-minute blog that DHH had done and took us down the Ruby on Rails path. And then it was just, we formed a new company with another individual that had spent some time in the startup world. And we started Zeal in 2013. And ever since then, it's been fake it till you make it, to be blunt. We've learned some things, but I'll tell you what, falling flat on your face a handful of times and making commitments with absolutely no idea how you're going to satisfy them is how I made it through this world and became really, really accustomed to it. And I would say, because I would get the question a lot, did you ever put your theater degree to use? This is where I put it to use, was I could convey confidence even when on the inside I was freaked out of my mind. Making commitments, I'm like, I have no clue how we'll pull this off. But it worked for me. And so we got to this point and built a really strong agency on the basis of that same sort of methodology. But it really got me thinking about how precarious this industry actually is for people who don't have that same skill set like I might. It's a hard thing. And in the acting world, you have auditions, and auditions are ruthless and painful. And you have to have a tenacity and a kind of almost sociopathic quality to make it through. Well, in a lot of ways, the same thing applies here. So that's where I came from and how I got here.
It's a cool journey. I'm interested to hear where some of your actually learning Rails came from. Was it kind of on the job experience, like you're promising to do things and then going to learn how to do it? And what kind of resources do you use for learning Ruby and Rails?
100%. Yeah. I sold a web app for $48,000 without having ever built a Rails app. So that's exactly what happened. Sorry, unnamed company. You were the arbiter of my learning. And there's probably some code you've since deleted, I hope. Yeah. So what my journey was, I had built in the process of learning PHP, I had kind of ad hoc together this framework that looked very similar to Rails without knowing it. And my now business partner had said, have you checked out this Ruby on Rails thing? And so I watched the Build a Blog in 15 Minutes video that David had done, and I was straight blown away. So the very first project I had done was I rewrote a game. It was like a form-based game for Dutch Bros Coffee. It was like a football pick'em game in Rails. And it was a disaster. The thing launched and literally didn't work. And there was like 10,000 players that came to the site on day one. And I had accidentally included the .json format response as the default response. So people would go to set in their picks, and when they would hit submit, they would just get JSON gobbledygook back, like just BS. And they had no clue what they were looking at. I couldn't interpret it. I was like on the fly, bringing the site down, putting it back up. Like it was crazy. And also we weren't using Heroku, so everything was FTP files. So I would FTP files changes up there and hope it didn't just totally crash. So actually that was the lie early on. That was the first Rails site that I had ever put into the world. And of course that gave me all the confidence necessary to go sell the hell out of a new thing. So that's what I did. So yeah, so there was a client, we had newly formed the company. There was a client that was like, we want to replace an app that we spend $500,000 a year in licensing. We want to replace this thing. I was like, well, you can do it. So I sat down and I still have it. I still have the handwritten estimates. I put down user authentication, 2 hours. Now this is before we used Devise. I literally was like 2 hours we build user authentication. And I was like full text search, 5 hours. Like it was crazy. And I estimated the whole thing. And then I tripled the estimate and it came out to $48,000. So I wrote up a contract by ad hocing together crap off of Stack Overflow, templates. You could go online and you buy like a service agreement template and you could pay for the whole thing. Or if you knew, you could right click and copy and paste chunks. So I copied chunks off of the demo example sample display. Yeah, I did that. And then I put this 10-page service agreement together. And I have to give massive credit to the chairman and COO because I know that he saw right through all of it, but there's something about the willingness still to like just go for it that resonated for him. Because I'll never forget his response after I said this contract to him. He sent it back and he was like, so I'm not sure this will work, but I'll tell you what, how about I have our attorney draft it up for you? And he paid to have his attorney draft our service agreement for him. Sent it back. I was like, yeah, I think this will work. And signed off on it. And I'll never forget getting the first payment, $7,500 check. My business partner literally is like, sends me a text. He's like, you have got to get on a Skype call because that's what we use. Skype call right now. Jumped on Skype and he's like, you'll never believe what I have in my hand. He lifts up this check and it was like, oh my gosh, we've made it. That project was a financial disaster. It was a disaster. We launched this app and the same chairman, he was like, so I'm a little worried that we're not going to get to the finish line. So I'll tell you what we're going to do. From this point forward, we're going to pay you $100 an hour and we'll just keep working on it until we get there. And it was because of his willingness to meet us in the middle, I guess we'll say, or really just help us out, is what gave me all my learning into Rails. And I came to appreciate all of the plugins, how the deployment process, getting things running. And I really found that Rails, and specifically Ruby, was a language that met on its most fundamental promise, which was developer happiness. It made it possible. And the combination of the two is where all the magic came from for me. And the magic I'm referring to is mostly the feeling of belief. Holy cradola, I can do this. We're a team of two, really just one, because he was a designer, my partner was a designer, and I could put together an application that this company will replace $500,000 in just licensing alone on. I can do that. And I'm not some magical programmer at all. I'm new to this game too, but we pulled it off. And I think in total, they probably spent somewhere in the, $200,000, $250,000 range, but they rebuilt their entire, like tripled, quadrupled the size of their company off of this tool. It was very successful for them. And I'd love to take some of the credit, but let's just get real. I think honestly, Ruby and Rails is what made it possible for them. And yeah, and ever since then, I've just had a love for it. And I think there's probably a deep appreciation that just comes down to just appreciating those early times when I could feel effective. I didn't feel stupid all the time. I felt like there were others, people I had names for, and many others that I didn't, that made it possible for me to feel like I had value in an area that I'd not spent my whole life doing. And to me, that was fantastic and very, very impactful.
The feeling of belief is spot on. When I was writing PHP, it was like the first server side language I tried to get into. And I was like hacking together like my SQL calls across PHP files. And I was like, I feel like there's a better way to do this. Like, or I just don't know how to do it because I didn't. And then I like read about Rails and I was like, okay. And it was like, here's some like patterns for you. And then all of a sudden I wasn't so much worried about like saving stuff in the database as I was like, okay, I can just build this form and scaffold it out. And I hadn't really thought about it was the feeling of belief that probably catapulted me into actually continuing to stay in development and become a professional developer. It's wild.
Well, the little wins, when you stack them, that's where confidence comes from. And I think when we talk about developer happiness as a community, on one side, what we're talking about is ease of use, the ability to conceptualize and grok and rationalize what we're doing. That's one side of it. But there's another side of it, which is how quickly can you get me to the win? How quickly can you get me to the point where I feel like a success? I don't know that Ruby's doing that as much as Rails is doing that, which is why it's kind of a match made in heaven. You have Ruby that's just a very elegant, easy to grok, easy to understand language. You combine that with a framework that as quickly as they can possibly get you, you've produced something. And I think that's the magic in it. Oftentimes Rails gets this criticism for being too opinionated in certain areas. But what I think we often forget is you can turn all that off. But to those early folks, those people that are just getting started, the ability to put a call in, to have a rich text editor pop up on the screen, and all of a sudden you can do something is unbelievable. The ability to write a simple generator command and a migration's there, and you're adding columns, tables, and relationships, and wire all that up is magical. That cannot be understated. All of those friction points that get added in other areas, languages, and whatnot, those are the things that if you turn it into the human impact of stuff, it makes it much more about, this is an audacious statement, but elitism. It creates this barrier, this boundary. And what we're talking about is we're talking about human beings on the other side. Because I also think we forget, like, you can replace that stuff. Technology is a beautiful, software specifically is a beautiful thing. We can replace everything under the hood and the client will never know the difference. We can do all of that. So your worst case scenario is you just have to invest in another thing later. But your best case scenario is you bring a bunch of really creative minds to the table that have the opportunity to create something beautiful that you couldn't have foreseen before. And that's the power of languages, frameworks, and communities that all serve to those purposes. And not just about, well, it's nice and fast, or I could do a magical, super special, patentable thing. That's this minute against the other side of things, which is engaging everyone else.
Whether US East 1 is down or you forgot to add a configuration file, everyone has an outage from time to time. When your next outage occurs, transparency is critical. The difference between a minor annoyance that people soon forget and a fiasco that creates sustained resentment is in how you communicate. That's why you need Honeybadger. Honeybadger will be a crucial component of your incident response plan with their uptime monitoring service that now has an exciting new feature, public status pages. Create a new status page with custom domains, branding, and more. Don't let Twitter be the only way your users can find out if your app is down. Sign up for Honeybadger to improve your incident response with a shiny new status page that you will be proud to show your users. Visit honeybadger.io and start giving your users a better experience today and let them know Remote Ruby sent you. Thanks to Honeybadger for their continued support of Remote Ruby.
So let's just go ahead and segue into it. You and I were talking at RailsConf, and you had mentioned that you were getting more involved with teaching developers and helping level up developers, which is something we've talked about on the show a lot. Andrew gets triggered by, to be honest. I don't mean that in a negative way, because everybody always says, yeah, there's lots of Rails jobs, but they're all looking for seniors. And that was the case. Like, my advice to people is apply for senior jobs, even if you're new. I mean, that's what I did, but that's kind of shitty advice too, because it's hard to walk into that and to be confident in that situation. It's a very nerve-wracking situation. So I was excited to hear you say that you're thinking about how to help teach people. So you maybe just want to start by sharing kind of some of what you're doing there.
Yeah, certainly. If I could, I'm curious from you, Andrew, what is so triggering about it in your mind?
Oh my God. I can feel it. It's like a rage that I've tried to suppress my whole life. It's just burning inside me. What's triggering about it is that, number one, not all these companies need seniors. What I feel like is that these companies put themselves into a hole and they're not planning for the future. They're not thinking about, oh, we're going to need more engineers. So maybe we should bring in some junior developers so we can teach them how that we write Rails and so that they can be really versed on how the way we do things. And they don't put in seniors in place who are willing to mentor or interested in teaching. And they do all these things. So now all of a sudden their engineers leave and they're like, crap, we need seniors now. And that's just it. And it's just a lack of foresight. It's a lack of planning. And to me, it's also a major lack of advocacy from the senior developers in the company, who I believe should be the ones that are like, hey, why do we need to hire a full-on senior for this? Would a mid-level developer work here? Would this? And why are they advocating for bringing juniors into the company? And why every time they're like, oh, the company's like, oh, we need to hire a senior, they're like, they just go along with it and they don't say anything about, well, maybe we don't need a senior here. Maybe we just need another pair of hands and we could bring in a junior and teach them and whatever. And it's just, I don't know, there's so many things that kind of go into it. And to me, it's like leading to this situation where we have so many people who want to write Rails can't and are being told they shouldn't and being told they're not to because the job market for Ruby on Rails is only for seniors, which isn't true, but it's really hard to find junior Ruby on Rails jobs. I've helped like several people over the years try to do that. And it's hard because the first thing they're like, oh, you don't have experience. And so I've tried to engineer ways to get around that. But it's just, if the seniors at these companies would start advocating for not only juniors, but for their longevity as well. If we don't keep Ruby alive and keep more and more people coming into it, how do we expect companies to keep choosing it year over year? And how do we expect to keep our job or prices rising? So it's just like a multi-pronged thing that really gets me going. And that's not even a portion of it. But yeah, that's kind of where I sit on it.
So early on, we started interviewing CTOs from companies that were actively growing. And each and every one of them was saying exactly what you did about we're only hiring senior positions. And what we found curious about it was when we sat down with these CTOs, as we were sort of market testing this idea of focusing in on mid-level folks and down, we asked them, can you define senior? And for starters, there was no consistent definition. There were traits and there was kind of a rhyme between them, but there was nothing that was consistent. If we asked the same question about what defined junior, similarly, there was not a clear definition of what junior looked like, but there were certain traits that tend to sound the same over time. Mid-level was entirely ambiguous. It was no one had a definition. More often than not, those that were defining junior over here were defining mid-level. There was this empty zone, this chunk in the middle. So the consistent thing was this, that senior positions or senior roles tended to sound like those that could take abstract ideas and break them down into concrete chunks. That was a consistent trend. They didn't necessarily have all the answers, but they knew where to find them. They had some sort of process on how to get there. On the other end, when you looked at junior folk, the definition that these same individuals had was individuals that needed concrete. They needed concrete steps. They needed concrete features. And the expectation of them was basically to do it by rote. So if you kind of look at these two ends of the pendulum, they kind of have this really ambiguous place in the middle where they cross, where an individual gets just enough experience to start to understand how to take something abstract and break it down, but they're not experienced enough to really be trusted to do that. And similarly there's this threshold where those same people are starting to gain more responsibility, and the expectation over time is that, well, now you can start to define those stories yourself, not just have them defined for you. And we realize that this is that threshold. The consistent thing of mid-level was process. When they had a process, when they had a habit, a routine, a system that they would funnel their thinking through, it was more probable that they would make the migration over to senior. Well, the question then becomes, who defines that process? Who defines that way of thinking, and how do you get there? And the answer was consistently the senior folks because they're the ones that are currently doing it. But the problem is they're undervaluing the folks over here that are really good at doing it by rote. And as a result of that, you end up with a self-fulfilling prophecy of only senior people. The thing that we discovered that most companies are looking for when they say we're only hiring senior people is a feeling of certainty. That's it. They just want to feel like they're not taking risks. And as a result of that, relatedly, is they feel like they're taking risks with the junior folks. But any of us who have ever been junior know that we are some of the hardest, most determined people because we know what's at stake. We know that there's a risk to the organization we're working for. And selfishly, we kind of know that we have a risk of our own job too, right? So we want to invest our time and energy into getting it right. So the software residency, which is a program targeting specifically to the people stuck in the middle, these folks that need to cross the chasm and start to make more of a headway and have more of a path to senior, what we realized is that those individuals needed one thing more than anything else, and it was mentorship. If all they had was a senior person, they didn't even have to be super senior. They could have been newly minted senior, just a fraction away from where they're at today. The level of growth that they had was exponential. Our hypothesis was 12-ish months. We thought that in 12 months, we could take somebody that was junior mid-level and get them flirting with mid-level senior. We thought that. In 6 months, they were rivaling the senior team members in those companies. And it simply came back to they gained mentorship. What was getting infused into their day-to-day was a model. They were seeing it firsthand how senior people thought through breaking down abstract problems. And because they had that prior experience of doing it by rote, and they had frameworks like Rails and others like it that were consistent and imposed style guides that could keep them consistent and conventions that could do so the same, then it meant that they were able to rapidly improve if that's all they did. But the other component of it, which I think you were talking about a little bit there, Andrew, is if junior and mid-level people are never given the opportunity to stand on their own 2 feet and to be mentors themselves, their depth of learning will always be handicapped. They'll never have enough opportunity to turn it around. So part of the program that we instituted, and I think any company can do this, is we instituted the teaching model. So in this program, it's a partnership with Learn Academy, which is a code school, where you have a bunch of super fresh, super eager, super hungry code school candidates that all they want to do is learn. And you take a resident and you take what they've just been learning in their job and you turn it around and have them present, have them guide, lead, and mentor these folks that are very, very new. Again, it starts to cement that knowledge into their head in ways that they otherwise can't get. And what so many companies, the mistake that a lot of companies make when they start to introduce junior people into their team is they never have that opportunity for them. They never give them a chance to explore what it's like to teach, to explore what it's like to help people that are even less experienced than they are. So for companies that don't have a classroom they can put them in, the answer is take interns. Take 4 weeks of interns. It's 4 weeks. It goes insanely fast. Take interns. It costs almost nothing. Learn Academy as an example as an internship program. It doesn't cost a company anything but time, but what it can do for other junior, mid-level, and even senior people is it can help cement knowledge in ways that they otherwise can't exercise. So it's that whole chunk is what makes it possible for senior people to be even better, but even more importantly, bring junior and mid-level people into a company successfully and not just kind of like wave at them from the sidelines and say, well, best of luck. Hope it all works out for you. Like, I know there's other companies out there that would love to have you. Yeah, or you, I guess. I don't know.
That's exactly what Robbie Russell said at our RailsConf live podcast, that companies should try to take on interns for a period of time. But kind of going back to the whole mentorship thing, I 100% agree. The first job I ever took in Rails, I was assigned a mentor. 4 years later, I meet with this man every single week still. When I left that company to join CodeFund, the reason was because Nate Hopkins was like, I will teach you, I will mentor you and make you a better developer if you come join me on this journey. So I did. And he was true to his word. And now I mentor other developers. Even though I don't feel like I'm good enough to do it, it's very interesting because if you mentor, you start to see they're not as much asking questions about how do I write this code? It's more like, how do I think? How do I communicate? How do I operate in this setting? How do I maximize my productivity? How do I get myself unstuck? And all the sorts of things, and just kind of like how to think about problems. And so, yeah, I think mentorship is huge. And that's kind of where I go, where I'm like, the senior developers in a company aren't advocating for bringing in juniors, because those are the people you need to mentor. And if you haven't hired seniors who are interested in mentoring, willing to mentor, able to mentor, then you're kind of in a weird position where you're always going to be having to bring in, new top tier talent, because you're not even building a base to bring up anyone.
When I would venture to say, and I'm curious for you, Jason, because Andrew, you just talked about your own mentorship. I did too. I'll bet $100 Jason had a mentor also.
I had multiple. When I first got into learning programming, I didn't have one. I learned, what was Railscast. There was, I think they're actually called Code School in Florida, that had the Rails for Zombies, stuff like that. Then I got my first job as a WordPress programmer, was there 6 months, got an offer for a Rails job actually here in Memphis, which is very rare. There are like 2 companies that write Rails or write Ruby. But there, I spent 4 years under 2 people who cemented a lot of the skills that I try to like pass on today. Skills about the database, SQL, just about thinking about solving problems. Because the problem I had, like Andrew's talking about thinking, I still have this problem, but like I think about things too complex. They taught me how to simplify things. And yeah, I still attribute most of my learnings to Will and Marilla at Lens Reynolds.
Yeah, mentorship's interesting because, you can have direct mentors, ones that know you, and you can have indirect ones. And heck, you can have mentors that are even dead. I mean, like Stoicism as an entire practice is built around mentorship from people who've been dead for many hundreds of years, if not thousands. And this is very true, but there's almost nothing that replaces the one-on-one mentorship. And the way often we'll think about it is this industry is one large landscape. And code schools specifically, or boot camps, they don't go into real depth in any area of the landscape. Really, their responsibility is to help you understand the landscape. What's the scope of it, the scale of it, things of that nature. But then you're going to figure out that there's an area of passion, or your job requirement is going to drive you down a very more narrow scope of skills or abilities. And that's when nuance starts to pop up. And so when you look at the companies that you're working for or working with, that's where mentorship becomes critical. And one area that a company can start to adopt where mentorship is almost baked into the practice is pair programming. You kind of can't pair program without a form of mentorship going on, even when the pair is 2 people of very similar experience levels. Invariably, at any given moment in time, one of the 2 is going to pop up with an idea that comes from prior experience, whether it's a totally different profession or the one they're in today. It's going to happen. And so that one-on-one mentorship component of it is so critical. The other thing we've realized is, as of late, senior pay and compensation is off the charts. And so there's a lot of conversation for us as agency owners and as business owners about how do we keep up with that? Because to be frank, there's a point at which it doesn't work anymore. And we start to lose good people to other companies, and great for them, but it's hard on the business. Well, what we discovered is that one way to help at least mitigate some of that is for senior folks is give them people to work with, to mentor, because that sense of value, that level of compensation of feeling like I'm helping somebody else rise to their potential is almost immeasurable. And as long as I'm getting well compensated monetarily, that kind of topper on the cake, the sense of self-worth that I gain as a mentor and as a senior developer mentoring others is humongous. So if nothing else, if you don't want to do it for the sake of benevolence to junior people, do it for the sake of retention, because it works. It totally works.
You're absolutely right. Pair programming was a big shift for us at Podia in the last couple of years. We started pair programming right before 2020. Like, we've always been remote, but something, like I've talked about this a lot, something about pairing with someone for 7 or 8 hours a day when you're isolated at home was a saving grace for me of that whole thing. But I've learned a lot from people, obviously more experienced than me and obviously smarter. That's everyone. But I've also learned from people a lot from people less experienced than me, just even the way they think about problems or even questioning why we do something. Like, why do you do it this way? Well, I don't know. That's a fantastic question. I have no answer. And it also, those kind of moments also help teach me because I have to explore and learn why certain things are that way. It's a very rewarding experience.
Jason and I paired today, not for long, but even that small amount, I feel this a lot as someone who is largely isolated. I gain so much joy from programming, not only just from that human interaction, but I tend to have fun doing it. I feel way more accomplished. I can do way more with someone else than I can by myself. And so every time I get off this pair call, whether it's with Jason, whether it's with Andrea, whether it's with anyone at Podia, I feel good. I feel better about the day. I'm happier. And I feel like we've accomplished it. And I learn a ton from people who know less than me. And I learn a ton from people who know more than me. Like today, I needed to do something in SQL. And I was like, I could maybe figure this out in like an hour or so. I was like, or I can see if Jason has a few minutes. He did. And 10 minutes later, he had taught me exactly what I needed to know. Now I know that going forward, and I can do that on my own now. Now I can teach that to someone else.
And I'll take this to like a meta level, I guess. I'm able to share those skills because somebody taught me those skills of SQL at my last job. And so, yeah, it's also like this chain reaction now.
Yeah, I think a lot about how we're going to keep our community alive. Before the call, we were talking about at RailsConf, there were 2 job boards. One was the big job board, I would say by and large senior positions. And then there was an equally large whiteboard, but it had been split into 3 different sections. And in that 1/3 of a section was early career. And I took pictures of it. The senior board literally had things falling off of it, coming off of it, pasted on the corners and edges. And on the early career, there were 7 items, one of which said, go look at the senior. And I remember like looking at this and going like, this couldn't be a better example of the challenge that we face as a community, whether it's Ruby or others, that if all we're doing is putting value into those highly experienced senior roles all the time and rewarding them with more and more pay, more and more respect, authority, acknowledgement, then we're going to consistently push out people because they just don't feel welcomed. I mean, like there was this interesting kind of byproduct that was felt by these boards. I mean, because when the hand goes up in the middle of the conference of like, who's new? You know, it's well past half of the group, raises their hand. And again, if you're hoping to make a career of this and you go look at the board, you're like, well, I don't feel like that. And I feel like I'm going to be one of 100 people striving for that over there. What's the point? And one of the things that really got me going is I went through a workshop with a wonderful gentleman and friend named Matthew Reynolds. He runs a workshop that he calls an equity lens workshop. And it is a very objective and tangible way to think about inequality and what you're going to do about it. And at the end of the workshop, you write out your personal equity lens. And for me, it was to create a prism for others to feel a part where they otherwise wouldn't. And it got me really thinking about all the things that we do in our industry, and those of us with privilege and those without. What do we do to help foster in a greater sense of equitability? And you can look at racial inequalities, but you can also look at experience inequalities. And unsurprisingly, the two tend to go hand in hand. And in the case of junior, mid-level, and senior positions, senior generally is still rather homogenous. It's changing, which is good, but by no means at the rate in which junior position or junior developers are, or even mid-level developers. So if you look at it from that standpoint, Andrew, you said a minute ago about feeling unstuck. Imagine being on a crossroads where already you feel like the world is kind of against you in a lot of ways, where you're already starting to feel the pressure of inequality. And then you hit this point where I've reached a fork in the road and I feel like I've learned enough to have a profession, but maybe I'm not smart enough to get past where I'm at. I just straight feel stuck. I feel stuck in the middle. What do I do now? And if you're one of us that finds a way through, great. But if you're others that kind of have a lot of other factors working against you psychologically and otherwise, then it's really easy to say, then I guess I got to go do something different. And how sad is that? So for all of us companies out there that are trying to create a more equitable space, racially equitable, socioeconomically equitable, you name it, one of the best places to start is find, force, and coerce as much as possible a way to introduce junior and mid-level people into your company. Because just by doing that, your application pool of underrepresented people expands exponentially, like it does just by product of that. But not to mention, you can actually start to hit those DEI goals that you might have shot for in the first place. And to me, that is where the magic all lies. You mean to tell me that all we have to do is create a better, more welcoming environment for folks like this to enter in? Then all we have to do is have a good method to support them, mentor them, give them a path forward to senior, stick with them all the way to senior, and then they're going to be the ambassadors to the next round that come in. That is a beautiful way to, again, be an equitable, rich company in all forms, and not just one that has to fight for people, a homogenous pool in the middle that has already got plenty of opportunity.
Adding on to that, it's also concerning about the future of this community if we don't do that. Because not only would it be amazing to start to give people real opportunities, but on the other hand, if we don't, people are going to stop learning Rails. They've already stopped learning Rails. And when there's no one left to hire, companies will then say, well, Ruby and Rails aren't a good choice for us. This won't be true. Like Ruby and Rails will always be around. It won't be true for everyone. But you already see it, like boot camps who started by teaching Ruby and Rails, now switching to Node. And I can't fault them because like I tell people, I want to tell you to learn Rails, but as much as it pains me and frankly pisses me off, you got to learn probably something else if you want a better shot at getting a job. And the more I tell people that, the less confidence I have in the longevity of what we're doing, which to then go full circle makes me sad, honestly, because of the point you made at the beginning of the feeling of empowerment, like the feeling of I can do this that I got from Rails. I want to give that to others, and I feel like can't.
The difference between me and Jason is it makes Jason sad. It makes me pissed off, really pissed off, especially when, I was working with a junior and he was at a boot camp and they were like, yeah, just stop trying to find a Rails job. Just try to find a JavaScript job. And he's like, I don't want to write JavaScript. And they're like, well, it's now affecting our bottom dollar if you don't try to find something else because you're struggling to find a junior Rails position. And that really triggered me. You want to talk about real trigger, Jason? That had me like throwing things around angry. So yeah, it's important for us as an industry, as like the Rails and Rubyists of like our industry to continue to push it forward, not only for us, but so other people can make their living and have the same joy that we feel.
So I'm curious. I'm going to ask you guys a question. This is great. Welcome to the Remote Ruby podcast. My two guests today are Jason and Andrew. I have a couple of questions for you, gentlemen. What do you think our first step is? What do we do tomorrow?
Start advocating, start training, start finding the holes in your organization as to why you can't bring in mentor or bring in juniors or can't bring in interns. Figure out where the bottleneck is. Is it management? Is it a problem with that there is some education that needs to happen there and some advocacy? Or is it a problem with your process and the people that you have on your team?
No, it's largely similar for me. That's the first thought that comes to mind. We recently hired at an associate level, which for lack of a better term is like junior for us. But there was a lot of conversation that went into that. And even now, I want us to set ourselves up to do it again. So it feels like it is a bit on us to keep the conversation going about how is this working out? What can we improve on? That is largely the same sentiment I share.
And I would also say you can just find someone on the internet who is a junior. And if your personalities mesh, start trying to help them. Help them with small, it doesn't have to be programming. Help them with their resume. One of the first things I now ask is like, hey, can I see your resume? Because I hired before. I am decently good at writing resumes. And sometimes I'm like, oh, maybe this is why. Like some of these resumes that I see. And it's not their fault, right? They just don't know. But you need someone who does know to tell you that. So find people and try to help them and try to spread the message of helping people so that other people can feel inspired to do the same.
Literally right before this call, I was helping somebody with a cover letter and realizing exactly what you said, Andrew, that it's just things they don't know. They haven't had the opportunity. We have this basically a pairing session where there's mentorship and saying like, hey, I've been there. Let me tell you what I saw. It may or may not be right. It doesn't mean that there's no guarantees here, but at the very least, here's some thoughts from the other side that might help you out a little bit. I know that when we've approached companies about bringing on junior people, one of the first hesitations is it's going to bring down my senior team, productivity wise. And in certain ways, there's something true about some of that. It's not patently true, but there's certain aspects of it. And it really just comes down to time spent. If you have somebody that's in a mentorship role where they're not actively solving a programming or feature problem and they're spending time mentoring, well, just time spent goes there. But the long tail of it is very different. The long tail is an investment that's going to pay out later on. But to that extent, where it feels like it's going to be a lost investment, where I'm going to take a senior person, I'm going to dedicate them into junior when they could be highly productive over here. Now, what do I do about that? This is where I think it becomes critical that the engineering management team does a really good job at not tracking the numbers and tracking the feeling of impact that your senior team now has. So at Zeal, we track morale. And it's an abstract number set. You can't say objectively that my version of a 5 is Jason's version of a 5. But in a general sense, you can. And if what we're tracking is the feeling, then that feeling can drive us forward. That feeling is what can give us motivation. That feeling is what can give us belief. That feeling can give us back to motivation to be more efficient, build a better product, to keep us from resting on our laurels. That feeling can be very powerful. And culturally, it can be immeasurable. That feeling of connectedness, like we're into something more than our product. I mean, here's the thing, and I hate to tell you, but most of us aren't as in love with the product our company does as the people in the company we work with. So if you put all of our attention, managers out there, on the new fancy feature that we should be excited about, why don't you forget about that part and have us get even more excited about the new people that just came on board? How about you give us their bios and celebrate when that happens instead of when a sprint gets done? Why don't we celebrate that stuff instead? Have parties when people are moving on to the next iteration of their career. Let's have a party about that. Forget your sprint party, whatever. Let's party that thing. Let's celebrate when somebody goes and speaks at a conference or a meetup. Let's get into the habit as a company of like sending cards again, handwritten notes. Why don't we get into that habit? Because it's easy to do the other stuff. But this hard part, this part where we're reminded that we're humans together, living life together, spending time together, helping each other. That's the thing that gives us a sense of contribution that's far greater than any line of code we're ever going to write. I guarantee you that the core teams of Ruby and the core teams of Rails don't just do it because it's technically challenging. I guarantee you that a vast majority of them invest their time, energy, and in a lot of ways money because of the people they get to work with, the kudos that they get, the time they get when they go to a conference and they get high fives and hugs and words of encouragement and appreciation. That's why they do it. Eileen, you should tell all but says exactly that. It's a labor of love. And that's the love that they get back from it is the feeling of community. So do it in your company. Celebrate that stuff. Then you're going to make some waves.
I will say Podia is really good about this, which has been surprising to me as someone who's not been on a team like that before, of celebrating people. And like every time someone new is brought on board, there's a massive email thread, everyone welcoming them with all like some information about them. And like people's birthdays, everyone's chatting. A manager's like, hey, it's so-and-so's birthday. And we're all like, happy birthday. And celebrating those like people things and like being excited for each other and rooting for each other as we like make accomplishments outside of work. It feels different. It feels very different.
Feels human.
It does. It feels like you're actually part of a team instead of people just working on a product together.
I was going to ask, what else can we do?
Well, I think internships are a big one. I think more companies need to offer internships. It's pretty low-hanging fruit. Internships can be tough. And this is actually one of the things that I'm putting a lot of energy into personally over the coming years is bettering the internship process so that companies feel like they can take on interns more readily, more easily, and they have a framework for that that's successful. But for all the reasons we talked about, I think interns are incredibly powerful. By and large, it doesn't cost a company anything but time. So that means that the entry point on it's pretty low. Internships don't have to be long. In fact, Learn Academy, which is a code school based out of San Diego, their internships only 4 weeks, which is a little short, but 4 weeks is 4 weeks. And it gives some level of job experience that they might not otherwise have. I think that if companies started to embrace the idea of interns, that they would find that it re-engages their team in ways that they otherwise might not have noticed. In the beginning, what I've observed is that bringing on new interns in the early days can be a little clunky for companies. It can be kind of off-putting in certain ways, but trust me when I say just stick to 2 rounds. Just stick to round 1, might feel a little clunky. Go into round 2, ad hoc or through another organization, and you're going to start to really see whether or not it's the right fit. You don't need to take 10, take 2. I wouldn't take 1, take 2, because then the 2 can lean on one another. This is really important. So pair them up. Actually, even going a step further, even if your company doesn't pair your interns up. So that, again, they can lean on one another and just see where that goes. So I think if we did more internships, that would make a huge, huge difference.
All right, Jason, when are we bringing on our interns?
Well, I have a 1-to-1 with CTO Monday, so I'll tell him to prepare to talk to you.
All right, cool. Yeah. Give him my number.
Perfect. I'm really grateful that we talk about this, and I'm really grateful for all the work you're doing and the thoughts you're sharing, Adam. I've never even considered, earlier you mentioned that a lot of the breakdown in like what's defines junior, mid, and senior is like process. That was pretty eye-opening. So I'm grateful for you sharing this kind of stuff. And it's stuff that I want to take and not just chew on and process, do nothing with. If I care about it, it makes me sad. I want to be someone who actually gets off his ass and does something to change it. So thank you for sharing that with us today. And before we wrap, is there anything else you want to chat about or any places on the interwebs people can find you?
Well, I do want to say that upcoming, speaking of podcasts, so we are in the process of producing a podcast ourselves called Stuck in the Middle, which is about this exact stuff. The format of it, I am very excited by. I'm the host, and my co-host is always somebody that comes from a lesser experienced state. So maybe they themselves are an intern or their first year or 2 at most in the career path. And then we find individuals that are working to solve the problem for these people. So maybe they started a code school, or Chris is an example. Hope to have him on the podcast soon, maybe you both, where their focus is we want to help people get unstuck. So I'm there really more to help facilitate and ask questions, but really open up the conversation around just the realities of feeling like you don't know, imposter syndrome, and also what are some of those subtle things that maybe aren't obvious that help you get unstuck and find a better path forward. And our goal is to, again, shed a light of hope, we'll call it that, a light of hope and belief for folks that feel like there's just so much conversation geared towards people who have no experience or people who have a lot of experience. But for those in the middle that just feel stuck and don't know what to do about it, that we help them out. Otherwise, you can find me online. As far as I know, I'm the only Adam Cuppy out there. So somewhere you'll figure me out. You'll find me.
That's a good feeling. There's only one other Jason Charnes I'm aware of. So
There's another Andrew Mason, and he's doing big things, and I'm very angry about it.
One of my best friends named Jeremy Cook, and that poor dude, there's millions of those. So,
well, it's better than having a famous bad name. There's I don't know, besides, did you see that? I think it's a Netflix series, or maybe Hulu. It's a series, it's a documentary following people who have names you wish you never had. Like, again, like just imagine going through life with the name Adolf Hitler or something.
Oh, gosh.
Like, I mean, right? Like just crazy stuff. Michael Jackson, of course, is simple, you know.
Yeah. I know a Mike Jackson. I mean,
oh, do you?
I know of a Mike Jackson. Yeah, here in Memphis. Yeah.
Same.
Mike Jackson.
One Adam Cuppy, don't you?
That's true.
Yeah.
That is true.
It's going in my book. People, the goats, the only ones.
The goats. Well, this has been a lot of fun, and I hope will inspire those listening to who maybe feel similar to also take the same steps. And I'll put this out there. If there's anyone who wants to talk more about this, I am legitimately willing to like hop on Zoom and chat more about it and explore it more. Or it doesn't have to be Zoom. You can send me an email. You can find me on Twitter, whatever. Get in touch with me. I would be willing to talk about it more.
Same, but don't email me.
Well, never mind. I was going to say, like, I've seen you in email a little more, but I also paired with you today and saw you had 170 unread Basecamp notifications. And
you didn't have to do me like that, Jason.
bruh, I took a screenshot of it and I deleted it. So this was my trade-off here.
Yeah, notifications. I'm not interested in them.
All right. See you later.
Bye.
Rock on, guys.